The candlelight at La Riviera flickered against the polished glass. Shadows stretched across the table where a folder sat waiting, heavy as a gravestone. Inside were papers worth $3.5 million. Papers that, if I signed, would mean surrendering my late husband's beach house, the home that had been my anchor for decades. Daniel, my son-in-law, leaned close, his cologne sharp and artificial, his smile sharper still. "Either sign it," he whispered, his tone dripping with confidence, "or you will never see your granddaughter." His words split through me like cold steel. Across the table, Emma, my daughter, kept her eyes down, her manicured nails pressing into the linen cloth as if she might disappear into it. She did not protest. She did not defend me. She let her husband's threat hang in the air like smoke. "My name is Grace Whitmore. I am 67 years old, a widow, once a school principal, now simply a woman who lives alone by the Carolina coast. I have spent my life raising 2 children, loving one husband, and protecting one home. That home, the beach house Daniel was now demanding, was never just an asset on paper. It was where my late husband Harold built a swing for Emma, where my son David carved his initials into the porch rail, where every holiday echoed with laughter. It was the heart of my family. And now, in this moment, Daniel believed he could take it from me with a smile and a threat. I looked at him steadily, then at Emma, and I felt something inside me break. Not just sorrow, but the quiet, steady crack of resolve hardening. I slid my hand into my purse, found my phone, and dialed with calm fingers. My voice, when it came, was steady, almost casual. "David," I said into the phone, "come to La Riviera. Bring the folder." David, my son, my anchor, my reminder that not all of my sacrifices had been forgotten. He was 40 now, a financial analyst who had spent nights at our kitchen table balancing budgets with his father. And tonight, I needed him to see what his sister and her husband had set in motion. I set the phone down gently beside the folder Daniel had pushed toward me. The silence stretched. Daniel's grin faltered. Across the table, Emma lifted her eyes for just a second, and I saw the little girl she once was, the child who used to bring me seashells from the beach and call them treasures. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman whose silence cut deeper than her husband's cruelty. That was the moment the game shifted. Not because I raised my voice, not because I slammed my hand on the table, but because I stayed calm. I had been underestimated my entire life for being a woman, for being older, for being quiet. Tonight, Daniel was about to learn that quiet does not mean weak. After all, the truth is simple. After I refused to give up my $3.5 million beach house, my son-in-law smiled and threatened me with the cruelest words a grandmother could hear. And in response, I calmly dialed my phone and said, "Someone else has a few words." And that, dear listener, is where my story begins. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me pause for just a second. If you believe in quiet strength, if you believe that women deserve respect and dignity, no matter their age, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Stories of justice, healing, and the courage to stand firm when the world tries to push us aside. Now, let me take you back to how it all started. That night at La Riviera was not the first time Daniel tried to corner me. It was only the sharpest blade in a long line of small cuts. Weeks earlier, He and Emma had come to me with demands dressed as requests. "It only makes sense, Mom," Daniel had said, his hand resting on Emma's shoulder like she was his prop. "You're alone now. Why let a house that valuable just sit there? Alone." That word again. It always stung. Harold had been gone for years, but his presence still filled the halls of that house, still warmed the creak of every stair, alone perhaps in the eyes of the world, but not in truth. That house kept me company. Its walls remembered me. I had said no, calmly, firmly. That home is mine until I am done with it. After that, it will belong to my children. But I will not hand it over to you now. That was when Daniel's smile had sharpened into something else, something predatory. He saw me as a resource to be managed, a prize to be claimed. He saw my age as weakness, my silence as permission. And Emma, oh Emma, my daughter. She stood there that day, her hand resting on her stomach, already 3 months pregnant, carrying the first grandchild I had prayed for. She did not argue with him. She did not tell him to stop. Her silence was agreement. That silence followed me to La Riviera, and that silence hurt more than the lawyers Daniel had brought, more than the papers they slid across the table. It was her silence that told me I could lose not only my home, but my daughter and my granddaughter. So yes, I dialed David. Yes, I summoned the son who still knew how to stand beside his mother. But in truth, what I summoned that night was something greater, my own resolve, my own line in the sand. This story is not about shouting. It is not about revenge in flames. It is about dignity. It is about quiet justice. And it begins, as so many stories of betrayal do, with a family dinner that was never about reconciliation at all. And that, my friends, was only the first move in a battle I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. What Daniel and Emma did not know that night was this: I had been preparing, and soon they would learn that the woman they thought could be intimidated was, in fact, unmovable. Because silence, when used wisely, can be the loudest answer of all. The beach house breathes when the tide turns. The boards give a small sigh under my feet. I sit in the front room with my burgundy scarf around my shoulders, salt still in its threads. The lamp casts a circle onto Harold's chair. The cushion keeps his shape like a palm keeps a tool's mark. My name is Grace Whitmore. I am 67, a widow, and this house and I have kept each other alive. I came home after the dinner that changed everything, washed my hands, and opened the windows to the dark water. The air tasted like metal and memory. When Harold was alive, still, this place was a workshop for joy. He taught himself carpentry from library books and said a board only behaves when you respect its grain. The summer we built the porch swing, David held the drill while Harold steadied the chain. I steadied the boy. Emma handed us screws from a bright red coffee can, counting each one with solemn pride. When the swing rose, Harold pushed me first. The sky was wide and foolishly blue. I leaned back until the sea filled my eyes. That August, a storm rushed in with the quick temper the coast knows. We sealed the windows, rolled towels against the doors, and made cocoa on the gas stove. Lightning cut the sky in white strips. Emma shrieked, then laughed. David pretended he was not afraid. Harold winked. When the rain passed, water glittered on the deck like beads. Emma stepped out barefoot and found a small shell curled like a sleeping ear. She pressed it into my palm and said it was our castle. I kept it in a saucer by the sink so I could see it while I scrubbed pans. Holidays gathered here as if the house were a magnet. The tree scraped the ceiling. Cinnamon and pine lived in the curtains for weeks. My mother's fudge recipe failed every other year. We ate it with spoons and called it pudding. Harold carved a cedar star for the top. David sanded the point smooth with the patience of a boy who wanted to be trusted. Emma draped the lights with grand theater. Sometimes the ocean roared so loud, we turned the music down to hear it better. We sang anyway. Our voices were small, but they braided into something sturdy. Then came the lean years, when Harold's diagnosis arrived like a storm without thunder. Bills crowded the mailbox. We opened them at the kitchen table under the yellow light, our hands finding each other without ceremony. I learned the arithmetic of mercy, which check to send today, which call to make tomorrow. We cut every extra thing and kept the house. In the evenings, Harold sat on the steps wrapped in this same scarf and said the wind off the water felt clean enough to drink. We promised the house we would hold on. After the funeral, the house did not fall silent. It learned a new language. Hinges spoke. The ice maker startled me at 2 a.m. Gulls argued on the roof at dawn. I made routines the way people set fences. I brewed coffee at 6. I walked the boardwalk at 7. I checked the mail before lunch. I polished the banister on Fridays. Little rituals kept the day from unraveling. I fixed what I could and hired help when ladders were too much. The plumber sometimes carried my groceries in and asked about the weather. The children grew in their separate directions. Emma's world turned glossy and fast. Meetings, promotions, dinners that began when I put on slippers. David steadied himself into work that looked like Harold's hands. Careful, honest, generous. When Emma married Daniel, I smiled for the photographs and kept the shell in the saucer. They came on summer weekends. Daniel admired the view with the hunger of a man reading a number. He called the deck an underperforming asset. I called it sunlight. We did not agree. I watered the rosemary and let the argument pass through the screens. Tonight, the rooms feel larger than my body. A widowed house and a widowed woman mirrored in the window glass. I pull the scarf tighter and run my thumb over the shell. Its ridges are still sharp under the skin. Time has not worn them flat. I think of Emma at 8, knees skinned, hair full of salt, declaring a kingdom from something the tide forgot. I think of what a mother keeps and what a mother must learn to release. The lesson is not gentle, but it is clear. I open the pantry and take inventory because that is what I do when I am rattled. Beans in jars. A tin labeled holiday cake in my handwriting. Baking powder that needs replacing. Harold used to say, "A house never stops teaching you." Tonight, it is teaching patience and breath. I rinse the saucer and set the shell back in its circle. The motion feels like a vow I am old enough to keep. I straighten the towel on the oven door and wipe a ring of water from the counter with my sleeve. The small order of things returns like tide water finding its level. The phone rests on the counter, where I laid it after calling David at the restaurant. The screen is dark. My pulse has settled now. I think about the folder in my desk and the names typed cleanly. Ink makes intentions real. A boundary can be spoken gently and held firm. The ocean brings another tide. The boards give their small, faithful sigh. Harold pressed the shell to my ear and asked what I heard. I said it sounded like our children laughing from 2 rooms away. Tonight, it sounds like resolve. I set the scarf on Harold's chair, turn off the lamp, and walk the hall by memory. The house knows my feet. I know its creaks. We are still here. We are still standing together. I have been called many things: teacher, principal, mother, widow. On paper, I am 67 and retired. In truth, I am still working. This house and the tide keep time with me. I run my mornings like a school day. Coffee at 6, boards swept by 7, a list taped to the fridge where the bell would be. Order steadies grief. Routine gives the heart a metronome. My name is Grace Whitmore, and I live alone on the Carolina coast in the beach house my husband and I raised when our children were small. The roof has learned my footsteps. The porch rails hold warmth. The kitchen remembers cedar and lemon oil. I kept a school safe for decades and learned the power of boundaries and the cost of looking away. Families in crisis sat across my desk. I measured words. I called when a call could keep a child from slipping. That training never left my bones. It shows up in the way I set chairs after company leaves, in how I label pantry jars, in the calm voice I use when someone tries to move my line. Harold, my late husband, used to tease that I could stare a storm back to sea. He was the laugh in our partnership. I was the list. Together, we made a harbor. Our daughter Emma arrived stubborn and dazzling. She talked early. She corrected her brother's math at 5. She lined up seashells by color on the porch rail and called the row inventory. Ambition looked good on her. So did salt wind. She grew into a woman who carried a planner thick with tabs, meetings blocked to the quarter hour, shoes that clicked out a schedule. Last spring, she called to say she was expecting a girl due in the fall. Her voice softened when she said it. Even through the phone, I felt her hand on her belly. Daniel entered our lives the way some men enter rooms. His confidence arrived first. He works in real estate, or as he likes to say, in opportunity. He smiles as if every conversation is a negotiation. He flatters servers. He corrects contractors. He turns every view into a number. I tried to welcome that drive. Harold had drive too. Drive built this porch. But Daniel's appetite was for leverage. How to borrow against tomorrow to smooth today. Stories about his firm reached me in pieces. A delayed payout. A restless client. An escrow that wandered. The first time he brought up the house, he spoke as if he were protecting me. "This is too much for you to manage," he said, standing with his back to the water like a realtor staging a photograph. "Let us put it in our names so we can insure it properly. We will keep it in the family. You will never have to worry." He used "we" as if the word were a deed. I rinsed 2 coffee cups and said I was not worried. I said, a home does not become safer when the person who loves it least holds the keys. Emma stood between us that afternoon, hand curved over the small swell at her waist. She said Daniel only wanted the best. She said I should relax. The baby would need stability. I looked at my daughter and saw the child who used to fall asleep in the back seat after beach days. Sand glued to her shins. A shell clenched in her fist. I wanted to say yes to peace. I wanted to be the soft place her life could land. Instead, I set a boundary in the simplest words I know. The house stays with me. Daniel did not argue. He smiled. He praised the view. He took a photo of the deck from 3 angles. He asked about flood insurance. He checked the crawl space. He said capital improvements with a straight face, and I said weathered cedar with mine. When they left, he carried the cooler. Emma carried a sack of lemons from my tree. I carried a quiet worry that would not set itself down. I watered the rosemary and told the house I was listening. The wind answered against the screens like an old friend clearing his throat. My son David is the other pole of this family. Steady, precise, a man who balances his ledger nightly. He is 40. He reads contracts the way some people read novels. He trusts numbers when people wobble. He loved Harold like a second spine. After the funeral, he checked my roof without asking and fixed the latch on the gate. He lays down small help the way others set down coasters. Where Emma chases a horizon, David builds a dock and checks the pilings. When I call him, I feel the ground return. The conflict did not appear overnight. It rose like a tide and tested the steps one by one. First came Daniel's suggestions about maintenance and insurance. Then came talk about convenience. Then a gentle question about whether I had a power of attorney ready in case anything happened. The sort of paperwork busy families prepare. He was not wrong to ask on principle. He was wrong to ask with an outcome in mind. The last time we discussed it, he used the word transfer, not temporary. Transfer. The air changed temperature when he said it. 2 days later, Emma asked me to dinner. "We should clear the air, Mom," she said. "Daniel booked La Riviera. You always loved that place." I said yes because I loved that place, because motherhood hopes against evidence. I wore my burgundy scarf, parked back. Inside, lemon and butter lifted room. Daniel had arranged the evening. 3 men in gray suits, briefcases like stones. Emma reached for water and did not drink. An attorney spoke of capacity and family. Daniel leaned in. "Either sign it, or you will never see your granddaughter." I called my son. "Bring the folder." The phone rang on a Tuesday morning, sunlight crawling across the kitchen tiles in thin rectangles. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up, expecting David with some detail about the markets or Marjorie next door checking if I needed eggs. Instead, it was Emma. Her voice carried that particular softness she used as a girl when she wanted something big. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we've both been too stubborn. Daniel and I would like to take you out to dinner. La Riviera. Tonight. Can we talk?" La Riviera. The name pulled me back decades. Harold and I had gone there for our 25th anniversary. He wore his one good suit. I wore a new dress that was more navy than black, the color of the sky just before full night. He had saved for weeks, slipping cash into an envelope marked roof, though the roof had been fine. That evening, we shared mussels in white wine, and he ordered champagne with the grin of a boy breaking rules. When the bill came, he signed with a flourish and whispered, "Worth every penny, Gracie." The memory still lives in the wood grain of that restaurant's tables. Now, my daughter was inviting me, there, not to celebrate, but to mend. Or so she said. I stood by the sink with the receiver warm in my hand. My first instinct was no. Too soon, too raw, too suspicious. The last time we spoke had ended in raised voices, her accusing me of hoarding, me insisting that a home was more than capital. The echo of that fight still lingered like smoke in my chest. Why now? Why so quickly softened? I could almost hear Daniel feeding her lines from the background, the way he sometimes did at family dinners, when he wanted her words to land just right. But Emma is my daughter. The girl who once braided dandelions into chains for my hair. The young woman who phoned me from college dorm halls because she missed the sound of the ocean. The pregnant mother who would soon bring my granddaughter into the world. If she was reaching out, could I ignore her? Could I hang up and turn away from that fragile olive branch? I stared at the shell on the window ledge, the one she had pressed into my hand at 8 years old, declaring our beach house a castle. I felt the sharp ridges under my thumb. I told her yes. My voice was calm, maybe calmer than I felt. I'll meet you there at 6:30. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and thought of Harold. He would have told me to go, but to keep my eyes open. He always believed people reveal themselves when the stakes are high. He would have said, "Gracie, you can listen without yielding. You can watch without giving ground." I imagined him across from me, coffee mug in hand, the smell of sawdust clinging to his clothes. The picture steadied me. The day stretched, filled with small tasks meant to keep me from thinking too hard. I folded laundry, wiped baseboards, polished silver I hadn't used in months. Every ordinary motion felt like rehearsal for the evening. I chose the burgundy scarf, the one that had carried me through storms, funerals, and celebrations. It was my armor, my reminder that I had already survived the worst. At 5:30, I locked the house and drove toward town. The sun dipped low, setting the water aflame in the rearview mirror. Familiar landmarks passed. The park where David once fell from the jungle gym, and Harold carried him home with one arm. The boardwalk where Emma won a stuffed bear and insisted on carrying it through rain. Each memory pulled at me, stitching together pride and pain. This was my family, flawed and fractured, but mine. Tonight, I was walking toward a conversation that could either stitch us tighter or tear us open. Traffic slowed near the harbor. I tapped the wheel, heart steady but heavy. I rehearsed what I might say, that I loved my daughter, that I would help but not surrender, that respect had to travel in both directions. Yet underneath the rehearsed lines lived a small, sharp fear. What if this dinner was not about peace? What if it was something else? La Riviera appeared with its familiar brick facade and window boxes overflowing with late blooms. Warm, light glowed through gauze curtains. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, breathing. My reflection in the windshield looked older than I remembered, but not fragile. My hands were firm on the steering wheel. My jaw carried Harold's stubborn set. I stepped out, scarf tight around my shoulders. The air smelled of basil and salt. With each stride toward the entrance, I felt as if I were crossing an invisible line, one drawn years ago between being a mother who gave endlessly and a woman who guarded what was hers. The hostess opened the door, and a wave of candlelight and quiet music wrapped around me. That threshold was not just wood and glass. It was the edge between the life I had lived, defined by duty, sacrifice, silence, and the life I was about to claim, one shaped by boundaries. I knew, even before I saw Emma at the table, that walking through that door would change everything. I crossed it anyway. I felt the air shift the moment I stepped into La Riviera. The soft piano notes, the scent of basil, the glow of candlelight, all familiar, yet beneath it ran a current, something practiced and sharp. The hostess led me toward the corner, and my eyes fell on the table where Emma sat. My daughter looked radiant, her skin carrying the glow of pregnancy, her dress cut with the elegance of someone living beyond her means. For a heartbeat, my chest softened. I saw the little girl who once pressed a seashell into my palm. But then my gaze slid past her. Daniel was already there, his shoulders squared like a salesman closing a deal. And he was not alone. 3 men in dark suits flanked him, each with a briefcase. Their presence turned what might have been reconciliation into a courtroom staged under dim lights. "Mom," Emma said, rising slightly to hug me. Her perfume was expensive, faintly floral. She held me for a second, then let go quickly, as though contact burned. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I told her, meaning it. I pulled my scarf tighter, feeling its burgundy threads steady me. Daniel leaned forward, smile too polished. "Grace, thank you for coming. We thought it best to have some professionals here, so things can be clarified." I lowered myself into the chair across from him. The table felt suddenly smaller, the candles more like spotlights. "Professionals?" I asked. One of the men extended a hand. "Richard Kirk, I represent Mr. Smith." He gestured toward his colleagues. "This is Mr. Lane and Mr. Fulton. We've prepared some documents for your review." Documents. The word coiled in my stomach. I had spent my life reading forms, permission slips, policy drafts. I knew how language could dress up a demand and call it procedure. Emma kept her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the linen. She had not objected to the staging. That silence cut deeper than the presence of any lawyer. Richard slid a manila folder across the table. "Given your age and the complexities of property management, Daniel and Emma thought it wise to put measures in place. A power of attorney, for instance. Someone younger to handle the beach house, investments, and other accounts. It would ensure security for everyone." I rested my hands on the folder, but did not open it. "My age," I repeated. "I am 67, not 97. Daniel's smile flickered. "Of course, Grace. But why burden yourself? You should be enjoying retirement, not fussing with insurance, taxes, or market fluctuations. Retirement doesn't mean surrender," I said evenly. Richard cleared his throat. "It's quite common, Mrs. Whitmore. These arrangements prevent confusion later. Family disagreements can be avoided if we put everything in writing now." Family disagreements. The irony tasted bitter. This wasn't prevention. It was ambush. My gaze shifted to Emma. "Is this what you wanted?" Her lips pressed thin. She glanced at Daniel, then lowered her eyes again. No answer. That silence echoed louder than words. Daniel leaned closer, voice lowering into something meant only for me. "Grace, this is simple. You sign tonight, and everyone wins. The house is protected. Emma and I can build our life, give your granddaughter security. Or," he paused, smile sharpening, "or you resist, and you risk losing everything that matters. Grandparents' rights, are limited. Courts rarely favor visitation when the parent objects. Think about that. No signature, no granddaughter." The words sliced clean. The restaurant noise faded, forks against china turning to white static. I stared at him, this man who had married my daughter, who now used my unborn grandchild as a weapon. Inside me, something hardened. Not rage, not yet. More like stone settling into place. I spoke quietly. "You would keep my granddaughter from me?" Daniel shrugged. "It isn't personal. It's practical. Emma needs stability. The baby needs stability. You holding on to a property you can't manage, it doesn't serve anyone." Still, I said nothing. Silence has power when used well. I let it stretch, let the lawyers shift in their seats. I let Daniel's confidence feed on its own echo. Finally, I turned to Emma. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "is this truly what you want? To make your child a bargaining chip?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not speak. Her silence was consent. Richard tapped the folder. Mrs. Whitmore, if you'll just sign an initial here, we can finalize everything tonight. It would be best for all concerned. I laid my palm on the folder, feeling its edges under my skin, and took a breath that tasted of garlic and salt air. And if I don't sign? Daniel's grin returned, cold and assured. Then you will never meet Eleanor. That's her name. Our daughter. You'll never see her smile. Never hold her. That's the cost of your stubbornness. The world seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table, not from weakness, but to anchor myself in the face of betrayal so sharp it almost stole my breath. My daughter's silence. My son-in-law's ultimatum. The weight of 3 lawyers pretending this was legal, not cruel. I inhaled slowly, steadying the tremor in my chest. I looked at Emma one last time, hoping, waiting. She lifted her chin and kept her silence. I nodded once, as though making a private decision. Then I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed past my glasses, my wallet, the photograph of 2 children with sunburnt cheeks and gap-toothed grins. My thumb found the phone. I dialed calmly, my voice level. David, come to La Riviera. Bring the folder. I set the phone down on the table, screen glowing. Daniel's smirk faltered just a fraction. The lawyers exchanged glances. Emma swallowed hard, eyes fixed on her lap. Silence returned to me like an old ally. I let it sit between us, heavy and unmovable. Because in that moment, the game was no longer his. The moment I ended the call to David, I placed my phone carefully beside the folder the lawyers had slid across the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my back straight, and let silence take the place of anger. Years as a school principal had taught me the value of quiet. Children grew more nervous when you waited than when you shouted. Tonight, these men in suits were no different. Daniel shifted first. His salesman's smile twitched as if it had developed a crack. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the wood. Grace, he said smoothly, though I could hear a thread of irritation in his voice. I don't think calling your son here is necessary. This is a family matter. We're all adults. We can work this out ourselves. I didn't answer. I lifted my water glass, sipped, and set it down slowly. My calmness unnerved them more than any storm could have. One of the lawyers, the younger one, cleared his throat. Papers shuffled. The music from the dining room drifted in, a soft jazz piece. But here, at our corner table, time felt suspended. Emma glanced up at me once, her eyes wide, as if pleading for me to speak, to release her from the tension. But she said nothing. Her silence was its own kind of wound. Minutes stretched, and I counted them the way I once counted tardy slips. The older lawyer, Kirk, leaned forward at last, his voice deliberately polite. Mrs. Whitmore, there's really no need to involve additional parties. These are straightforward documents. They protect your interests as much as your family's. If you'll just review and sign, I'll wait, I said simply, cutting through his practiced cadence. My tone was even, but final. The words dropped like a stone in water, rippling through the table. Daniel frowned, his jaw tightening. I caught the faintest glimpse of the boy he must have been. Someone who hated losing, who grew louder when silence outlasted him. And then, 23 minutes after my call, I saw him. David entered the restaurant still in his work clothes, the sleeves of his pale blue shirt rolled to the elbows, a navy tie loose around his neck. He carried a slim black folder under one arm. His steps were brisk, his expression calm but alert. My son had always been that way, steady like his father, never rushing except when rushing mattered. He spotted me, then the table crowded with strangers. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. He approached without hesitation. "Mom," he said, his voice warm enough to remind me I wasn't alone. He pulled a chair from a neighboring table, sat down beside me, and set the folder in front of him. Then he looked at the men across from us. "Gentlemen?" Daniel forced a laugh. "David, good to see you. We were just, well, your mother may have overreacted a little. These are standard papers. Nothing threatening here. We just thought it best." David didn't let him finish. He picked up the manila folder they had pushed toward me and opened it. His eyes scanned the lines, page by page, as quickly and efficiently as I'd seen him scan ledgers and contracts since he was 20. The silence this time was his tool, and I let it stretch with him. Finally, he closed the folder and set it aside. He lifted his own slim case and placed it squarely in the center of the table. "I see," he said, "but there's a problem." Daniel's smile faltered. "Problem?" David opened his folder and withdrew a single stack of crisp papers, bound neatly with a clip. He spread them so the bold header faced the men across from us. "This beach house," he said evenly, "doesn't belong to my mother anymore. It was transferred into an irrevocable trust 2 weeks ago." The words cracked across the table like thunder. For a beat, no one spoke. Then the young lawyer shifted uncomfortably, leaning toward the pages. Kirk frowned, adjusting his glasses. Daniel's face drained of color. "What?" he demanded. "That's impossible. She wouldn't." "She did," David interrupted, his voice calm but edged with steel. "And I witnessed it. I'm trustee. The beneficiaries are Emma and me, with certain stipulations. Which means, Daniel, that your plan tonight is already irrelevant." Emma gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Her shoulders shook. "Mom," she whispered, You already." I kept my eyes on her, my heart torn in 2 directions at once. I wanted to reach for her, to wipe her tears like I had when she was small. But I also knew those tears carried more than sorrow. They carried exposure. She had stood by while her husband schemed. Now the truth was unveiled. Daniel slammed a palm on the table, rattling glasses. Diners nearby glanced over. His composure cracked wide. "You think this protects you? You think some fancy paperwork will keep you safe? I'll challenge it. I'll fight it in court. You can't cut me out like this." David didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, meeting Daniel's eyes with steady calm. "The law doesn't care about your outrage. The trust is binding. You have no standing. None. You overplayed your hand, Daniel." The lawyers exchanged uneasy looks. One quietly closed his briefcase. Kirk muttered something about misunderstandings, about reviewing documents more carefully, but his voice lacked conviction. Across the table, Emma's tears spilled freely now. She turned toward me, her voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't know you'd already done this." "Yes, you did," I said softly. "You knew I wasn't going to hand the house over. You knew because I told you weeks ago when you asked. But you chose to sit here tonight, to let this unfold." Her sob cut through the air, and she pressed her hands to her stomach as though to shield the child inside. For one aching moment, the sight nearly undid me. My granddaughter, innocent, unborn, tied to this tangle of betrayal. I forced myself to remain steady. "Emma, I love you. But love cannot mean surrender. Not tonight. Not like this. The table sat in stunned silence. The reversal had landed. The power Daniel thought he held dissolved like salt in water, leaving him exposed and furious. The lawyers looked for escape. Emma wept, caught between loyalty and shame. And me? I stayed still, my scarf warm around my shoulders, my son at my side. I had not raised my voice. I had not begged. I had not given in. Quiet strength was enough. For the first time in weeks, I breathed fully, and in that breath, I knew. The tide had turned. The table was a battlefield, but I had not yet played my last card. David's revelation about the irrevocable trust had already shaken Daniel to his core, but I knew men like him rarely stopped when cornered. They flailed, grasped, shouted about fairness and rights. I wanted no part of that chaos. I wanted the law. And I had prepared for this moment long before stepping through the restaurant door. I reached for my phone again, slow and steady. Daniel sneered. Who now, Grace? The sheriff? Maybe your bridge club? I didn't answer. I dialed a number saved under a single name, Louise. She picked up on the second ring, her voice clipped but warm. Grace? La Riviera, I said. Now, bring the file. Her reply was short. On my way. I ended the call and returned the phone to my purse. Then I folded my hands again, calm as the tide. Daniel chuckled, but it sounded thin, like glass under strain. A lawyer of your own? Really? What's the point? We already have 3. Right here, David spoke before I did. 3 lawyers who just learned they're on the wrong side of a trust. The younger attorney shifted uncomfortably. Kirk muttered about misunderstandings. Fulton excused himself to take a call, though I noticed the way he clutched his briefcase like a lifeline. The circle was already fracturing. Emma sat silent, her face streaked with tears, her hands protectively over her stomach. She looked so young in that moment, younger than her years, as if all her ambition had melted into fear. My heart ached, but I stayed steady. A mother can love and still draw a line. Minutes later, the restaurant door opened, and Louise Qualls strode in. At 70, she was small, silver-haired, and carried herself with the assurance of someone who had spent 4 decades dissecting lies in courtrooms. Her heels clicked with purpose across the tile. Diners glanced up, sensing the gravity she carried, then turned quickly back to their meals. She spotted me, lifted a hand in greeting, and approached our table like a general surveying terrain. Evening, Grace. Her smile was warm for me, cool for the others. I hear there's business to attend to. Daniel stood, attempting charm. Mrs. Qualls, is it? This is really unnecessary. We were just having a family discussion. Louise set her briefcase on the table with a firm snap. Family discussions don't usually involve threats about grandchildren or power of attorney documents prepared without consent. Do they? The color drained from Daniel's face. Louise opened her case and withdrew a pristine folder, thicker than theirs, stamped with the county seal. She spread the papers carefully across the table, aligning them with surgical precision. Here, she said, tapping the first page. The Whitmore Family Trust, established 2 weeks ago, irrevocable. The attorneys leaned in, drawn despite themselves. Kirk frowned, eyes scanning the lines. The beneficiaries. His voice faltered. Emma and David. Louise finished crisply. With David as trustee until the beneficiaries reached 25. All property, including the beach house, investments, and life insurance policies, are secured. Beyond challenge, Daniel's mouth opened, then shut. He looked from Louise to me to David, his confidence crumbling. This is manipulation. You went behind Emma's back. No, I said quietly. I protected what your ambition threatened to consume. I safeguarded my daughter's inheritance from you. Emma gasped softly. Her tears fell harder now, hands trembling on her belly. Mom, she whispered, though whether it was accusation or relief, I could not tell. Louise turned her gaze on the three attorneys. Gentlemen, I suggest you consider your own positions carefully. Continued involvement in this scheme could border on aiding undue influence or, worse, elder exploitation. And I assure you, I know exactly how to file those motions. The younger attorney paled. Kirk closed his folder with deliberate slowness. Fulton had not returned. One by one, the so-called reinforcements peeled away, leaving Daniel exposed. Daniel tried one last angle, his voice rising. This isn't fair. We have a wedding to pay for. Emma deserves stability. The baby deserves security. You can't just lock away everything in a trust. Louise's eyes flashed. Security doesn't come from stripping a mother of her home. It comes from integrity, from choices that protect rather than exploit. And as of now, the only security here is the one Grace has already secured, for her children, not for you. The table was silent except for Emma's muffled sobs. I rose slowly, my scarf falling into place over my shoulders like a mantle. My knees ached, but my spine held firm. I placed both palms on the table, looked at each of them in turn, and spoke the words I had carried for weeks. Boundaries are love, I said, thematic echo. The truth of it settled heavy in the air. Daniel blinked, as though the phrase had no translation in his world of contracts and deals. Emma looked up at me, her tears pausing for a heartbeat. David's hand rested lightly on the papers, steadying them, steadying me. Louise nodded once, firm and approving. I drew a breath, my voice calm and clear. I love my children. I love my granddaughter, but love without boundaries is just surrender, and I will not surrender tonight. The words hung, final and unshakable. The balance of power had reversed fully. Daniel sank back into his chair, chest heaving. The attorneys had already distanced themselves, their eyes avoiding his. Emma wiped her cheeks, her silence breaking into quiet sobs. David closed the trust folder, slid it back into Louise's case, and stood beside me. The dinner was over. The ambush had failed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something steady and clean rise in my chest. Freedom shaped like resolve. I drove home from La Riviera in silence, the road blurred by headlights and salt air. My scarf still carried the faint perfume of garlic and wine, but beneath it lay the sharper scent of betrayal. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house stood against the night like a sentinel. The porch light glowed softly, the same bulb David had replaced last month. I climbed the steps slower than usual, my body carrying the weight of words, spoken and unspoken. Inside, the rooms felt too wide, as if echoes had stretched the walls. I slipped off my shoes and walked straight to the kitchen window, where the shell still sat on the sill. Small, pale, chipped on one edge. Emma's shell. Her castle. She had placed it in my hand all those years ago, declaring it a fortress against the sea. Tonight I touched it again and whispered, "Daughter, your castle has become a bargaining chip." The words trembled in the air, fragile and bitter. I pressed the shell to my ear, listening for the ocean, but all I heard was my own pulse. I brewed tea, though I wasn't thirsty, stirred honey, though I wasn't hungry. Rituals help. They remind the heart it still knows the steps. I carried the mug into the living room, sat in Harold's old chair, and let the steam curl into my face. The house sighed around me, the boards shifting with the tide. My body should have felt relief. Daniel had been silenced, the lawyers scattered, the trust secure, but my chest carried something heavier. The image of Emma's tears would not leave me. Her face, streaked and trembling, her hands on her belly, as if the child inside could shield her from consequence. I had wanted to reach across the table, to fold her into my arms, and say everything would be fine. But I had not. I had stood instead, saying boundaries were love. And now, alone in the dark, I wondered, had I been too hard? Too rigid? Harold's voice echoed faintly in memory. Grace, you've always known when to draw the line. He used to tell me that firmness was my gift, the way I protected students, the way I protected him. But protecting your own child from herself, it feels different. It feels like cutting a rope you once tied with your own hands. I set the tea aside and pressed my palms together, breathing. The moral conflict pressed sharp. Should a mother ever draw a boundary so stark that it risks losing her daughter? Shouldn't love bend? Shouldn't it forgive? I thought of other mothers I had known at school, women who bailed sons out of jail, who gave daughters their last savings, who let boundaries blur until nothing remained. Some of those families healed, many did not. My own daughter had sat silent while her husband threatened me with my granddaughter. Silence, yes, but not innocence. Her tears at the end had been real, but tears do not erase choices. If I caved tonight, if I handed her and Daniel the deed, what lesson would I leave? That manipulation works. That family loyalty means surrender. That love is the absence of resistance. I rose, restless, and walked the hall. Family photographs lined the wall. Emma at 5, holding her seashell. David at 8, grinning with a missing tooth. Harold kissing me in front of this very house. Each frame was a reminder of love lived honestly, without barter. I stopped in front of Emma's graduation photo, her cap crooked, her smile luminous. My throat tightened. Where had that girl gone? Had I failed her by protecting her too much? Had my soft places become breeding grounds for entitlement? Back in the kitchen, I picked up the shell again. Its ridges pressed into my palm, steady and unyielding. A castle, yes, but castles require walls. Without them, they crumble into sand. Boundaries were walls, not prisons. I whispered it again, louder this time. Boundaries are love. Still, the bed was restless when I finally lay down. My body shifted through hours, mind tumbling through what-ifs. What if Emma never forgave me? What if my granddaughter grew up without knowing me? Would she hear only Daniel's version of the story, that her grandmother was selfish, unyielding, cold, that I loved property more than blood? The questions circled like gulls over water. Near dawn, exhaustion pulled me into shallow sleep. In dreams, the beach stretched endless. Emma stood at the tide line, holding her daughter, calling to me. Between us lay the shell castle she had once built, its towers tall but fragile, each wave testing the edges. I reached for her, but when I touched the walls, they crumbled, turning to salt in my hand. I woke with tears damp on my cheeks, the sky outside pale with morning. I sat up, steadied my breath, and touched the shell once more. Its shape had not changed. What it symbolized had. Love without limits was not love at all. But knowing that truth did not quiet the ache in my chest. The night had left me with a wound. The knowledge that justice can feel like cruelty when it lands on those you love most. And yet, even in the ache, I felt a small certainty settle deep. I had chosen the harder road. Perhaps one day Emma would understand. Perhaps she never would. But my granddaughter would grow up in a family where manipulation was not rewarded, where love and dignity were not for sale. And that, I told myself, was worth the sleepless night. The morning after the dinner felt thin and brittle, like the sky had been scraped clean. I brewed coffee the way I always do, kettle first, grounds measured with the same dented scoop. The mug Harold bought me at a roadside stand shaped like a small lighthouse. The routine steadied my hands. I carried the mug to the porch and sat where the sun first reaches the rail. The ocean hummed. Gulls negotiated. The house exhaled in slow wood creaks. I lifted the cup and told myself I had done what I had to do. My phone buzzed against the table. David's name glowed on the screen. I answered, bracing without meaning to. He did not waste time. "Mom, heads up. I'm hearing chatter about Daniel's firm. A compliance officer at one of their banks flagged irregular transfers. Something about client escrow funds moving to an internal account and then to a personal card. Nothing formal yet, but people are talking escrow," I said. The word felt clinical and cold. "That is other people's money." "It is," David said. "And when people treat it like a float, it gets noticed. I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else." I thanked him. We kept it brief. He had a meeting. The call ended, and I held the phone a moment longer, the quiet pressing in. I did not feel triumph. I felt a slow, stern sadness, like the kind that visits a school office after a good kid finally breaks a rule in a way that cannot be ignored. Life keeps a ledger. Sometimes it audits without warning. An hour later, I drove into town for groceries. The produce aisle smelled like citrus and spray mist. Two men from the marina spoke near the apples, their words low but not private. "State Board is sniffing around," one said. "He was bragging about that waterfront package last month. Now he can't move funds." The other whistled the way men do when they see a storm line on the horizon. I kept my eyes on the oranges and counted 10 for juice. At the checkout, Clara from the register glanced at me with a question she didn't ask. News travels fast in small places. I bagged my groceries and offered her a smile that meant I had no story to give. She nodded. Mercy looks like minding your own business. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. A letter from the insurance company, a catalog, a card from an old colleague with a picture of her grandsons in matching hats. I paused at the bulletin board near the door. Lost cat, church supper, a flyer for a community legal workshop on elder fraud. I took a copy and tucked it into my bag. The world is very good at inventing new ways to steal. The only reliable defense is a well-set boundary and a witness. Back at the house, I set the groceries on the counter, lined the lemons in a bowl, clipped the flyer to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sailboat. I poured a second cup of coffee and stood at the sink where the little shell keeps watch. The light turned it into a small, white flame. I pressed my thumb to its spine and whispered to no one in particular, "Life has its own way of teaching lessons." Near noon, my phone rang again, an unknown number with a city code. A woman introduced herself as an investigator with the State Real Estate Commission. Her tone was polite, measured. She asked if I had been asked recently to sign any documents related to property transfers. I answered carefully. Yes, There had been a discussion. Yes, I had seen papers. No, I had not signed. Yes, I had counsel. She thanked me for my time and told me I might receive a follow-up call. She did not use Daniel's name. She did not need to. I made a sandwich, tomato, and salt. The simple lunch that always tastes like summer. I ate standing up, looking out at the water, thinking about justice and how rarely it arrives on the timetable we want. People assume justice is a gavel, a line of squad cars, a headline. Often it is quieter, a bank algorithm, a compliance alert, an audit in a room with gray carpet and bad coffee. Tonight, Daniel would call it unfair. To me, it looked like gravity. I allowed myself exactly one memory of his better moments. The fall after the wedding, he fixed the sticking back door without being asked. He returned from the hardware store with the right hinge and the right screws, and an attitude of competence that for an afternoon felt almost comforting. I remember thinking that if he stayed in that lane, useful, humble, present, he could be good for Emma. Then the hunger returned, the chase, the way he turned people into rungs on a ladder he never seemed to reach the top of. I set the plate in the sink and decided that remembering one kindness was enough for the day. The afternoon stretched in the working silence of a house that knows how to wait. I moved laundry from washer to line. The wind pinned sheets into billowing sails. I paid 2 bills and wrote the amounts in my ledger, pen scratching like a cricket. I called the roofer to schedule the fall check. Ordinary acts arranged themselves into a shield. Just before 4, Louise called. "News is moving," she said. "You may hear more soon." Do not engage with anyone who shows up at your door asking questions. Direct them to me. Save any messages. "I don't want this to hurt Emma," I said. The sentence came out smaller than I meant. Louise's voice softened in a way that reminded me she had also raised children. Consequences find their own targets, Grace. Sometimes love is letting them land where they belong. You protected Emma's inheritance. You did not set this wheel in motion. After we hung up, I sat on the steps and let the late light find my face. A pair of kids rode bikes past the gate, their laughter bright and thin in the wind. I thought about my granddaughter, her small hands one day exploring this porch rail, the first time waves would lick her ankles, the exact moment a shell would fit her palm like an answer. I did not want her born into a story where the loudest man owns the truth. I wanted her to grow up in a family where apologies count and boundaries hold. Toward evening, Emma texted, just 3 words. "Are you home?" I typed yes and waited, expecting a car in the driveway or a doorbell's nervous ring. None came. Instead, another message appeared. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, feeling the old reflex to fix and smooth and make easy, the reflex that had gotten us here. My fingers hovered. I wrote, "When you are ready to speak without threats or paperwork, I will listen." Then I set the phone face down on the table and took my coffee back to the porch. The sun slid toward the water in copper strips. I lifted the mug and tasted its cooling edge. I did not toast the news about Daniel. I did not curse it either. I let it be what it was, a turning of the tide that had nothing to do with my wishes. The porch boards warmed my feet. The shell stayed bright on the sill. Somewhere inside, a small, unshowy peace settled, a knowledge that I was not the judge. I was simply a woman who had drawn a line and chosen to keep it. Life teaches. Sometimes it uses teachers. Sometimes it uses banks. Tonight, it used neither. It used the sea, patient, relentless, drawing back what never belonged on shore. The doorbell rang just after 9 the next morning. I was still in my robe, hair pulled back, nursing the second cup of coffee I hadn't really wanted, but poured anyway. For a heartbeat, I considered ignoring it. After nights like the one I'd lived through at La Riviera, the world feels sharp, as though even kindness might cut. But the bell chimed again, steady and patient. When I opened the door, there she was, Marjorie. I'd seen her moving into the duplex across the street 2 weeks earlier, but we'd exchanged little more than neighborly waves. Today, she stood holding a covered dish, steam escaping from the foil edges. "Cornbread," she said, smiling. "My grandmother's recipe. I always bake too much. Thought you might like some." I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She entered with the energy of someone who had decided long ago not to wait for permission to belong. She wore jeans and a cardigan the color of moss, silver hair pinned back with a clip that glinted in the morning light. She placed the dish on my counter and looked around with interest, not judgment. "You have a beautiful home, warm. I can tell it's been lived in with love." I felt my throat tighten, but I only nodded. "Coffee?" "Always," she said. "Black, please." I gave up cream when my doctor said bones over hips. She laughed, a sound that filled the kitchen in a way silence never could. We sat at the table with mismatched mugs, mine the lighthouse, hers borrowed from the set Harold and I had bought at a flea market years ago. She broke off a piece of cornbread, steam curling up. "I lost my husband 4 years ago," she said matter-of-factly. 45 years married. House too big, so I downsized. That's why I'm here. And you?" "Widow," I said. "Harold passed 6 years ago." Her eyes softened. "So we share that club. The one no one wants membership in, but here we are." She sipped, then studied me. "And we share something else, I think. You're carrying a heaviness, not just grief. Something fresher." I stiffened slightly. "Bad night," I admitted. "Family, complications." She nodded, not pressing. "It shows." I know that look. I've worn it. Children can wound us in ways no stranger ever could. The words struck so true, I nearly dropped my mug. I steadied myself, breathing slow. "My daughter," I whispered. "She sat across from me last night and let her husband threaten me. For a house. For access to money." She didn't stop him. Marjorie was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. Then she said, "I once caught my son trying to sell the car I'd promised to my husband's brother. Title in my name. He wanted to pocket the cash. When I confronted him, he said, 'You won't need it anyway.' That sentence broke something in me." She shook her head. "Blood is complicated." I leaned back, stunned at the ease with which she named her pain. No shame, no whispering, just truth laid bare. "What did you do?" "I cried first," she said simply. "Then I got practical. I joined a community group for seniors who'd faced financial manipulation. We sit in a circle, share our stories, swap resources. It's not therapy, but it is healing. We learn how to hold our ground without losing ourselves." I looked at her, the cornbread cooling between us. "A group?" "Yes. We meet Tuesday evenings at the community center. Nothing formal. Coffee, folding chairs, a few lawyers and social workers who donate their time. You'd be amazed how common these stories are. We think we're alone, but we're not." She reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. Come with me. Just once. See if it helps, I wanted to say. Number. My instinct has always been to carry my burdens privately, to hold my pain like a sealed envelope. But her eyes, steady, kind, unflinching, made refusal feel like locking myself back in the dark. What if talking about it makes it worse? I asked. Marjorie shook her head. Silence makes it worse. Talking is air, and air is what keeps wounds from festering. Her words hung there, simple and undeniable. I glanced at the shell on the sill. My daughter once called this house a castle. I said softly. Last night, she let it become a bargaining chip. I don't know how to carry that. You don't have to carry it alone, Marjorie replied. That's the mistake most of us make. We think strength is silence. Sometimes strength is admitting we need others to witness our pain. For the first time in days, I felt the possibility of a different path. Marjorie wasn't trying to fix me. She was reflecting me back to myself, showing me that surviving betrayal didn't have to mean shrinking into solitude. There was another way, to heal among people who understood. I broke a piece of cornbread and tasted it. Sweet, moist, flecked with jalapeno just enough to bite. It warmed me from inside. Tuesday? I asked. She smiled. Tuesday. I'll pick you up. We'll sit in the back row if you like. No one has to speak the first time I nodded. My eyes stung, but not from grief this time, from relief. Maybe healing wasn't only about setting boundaries. Maybe it was also about opening doors I'd long kept closed. Marjorie lifted her mug in a small toast. To castles rebuilt. Stronger walls, kinder rooms, I touched mine to hers. The sound, a quiet promise. Tuesday evening came with the clean smell of rain on hot pavement. Marjorie pulled up in her old sedan and honked once, a cheerful, practical sound that said we were keeping our promise. I locked the front door, slid my keys into my pocket, and patted the shell I had tucked beside them. A small thing to carry, a reminder that love could be beautiful and sharp at once. The community center sat behind the library, a low building with scuffed floors, and a row of vending machines that never worked when you needed them. A hand-lettered sign on copy paper read, Seniors Helping Seniors. Coffee, Tuesdays at 7. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. A large urn sputtered. The smell of powdered creamer and store-bought cookies filled the room. Folding chairs formed a circle. Not an assembly line, not a panel. A shape that told you everyone had a place. Marjorie squeezed my elbow. Back row? Back row, I said, though in a circle there is no back. We sat near the door. It felt like a compromise between staying and bolting. A woman in her 30s with a ponytail and a clipboard stepped forward. Welcome, she said. I'm Diana. I coordinate programs here and keep the coffee flowing. We keep the rules simple. One person at a time, no fixing, no shaming. Privacy stays in the room. We pass the basket if you want to chip in for snacks, but you don't have to. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from doing the right work for a long time. If you're new and want to just listen, that's fine. Listening is work too. 12 people settled. A tall man folded his hands. A woman smoothed her skirt. Someone cracked a joke about the coffee tasting like hot regret, and the circle laughed, grateful for the permission to breathe. I felt my shoulders drop a fraction. Diana nodded to an older woman with a brisk haircut. Maxine, would you like to start tonight? Maxine cleared her throat. 72. Retired nurse. I thought I was too smart to get taken in by family. Turns out I was just too tired to say no. My daughter forged my signature on 2 checks. I didn't press charges. I told myself it was a hard time. Then she did it again. Last week, I put a freeze on my credit and took her off the bank account. I cried for 3 hours and slept for 10. I'm proud and I'm wrecked. Her hands trembled. The room murmured, not pity, recognition. Next was Eddie, a soft-spoken man in a denim jacket. 78. I taught history for 40 years. Thought I taught my kids, too. My son convinced me to invest in his business. Turns out the business was him losing money online. I stopped the transfers. He hasn't called in 6 months. I'm learning that love without limits turns into a hole you never stop filling. He stared at his hands. I miss my boy. I keep the phone charged anyway. Rosa went after him, elegant in a green scarf. 60. My grandson sold my car when I was in the hospital. Said he needed the cash to fix something fast. He forged a bill of sale and pocketed the money. The police found it stripped for parts. I light a candle for him every night. Then I go to bed with my purse in the closet, and the closet locked. She smiled, a small fierce thing. This week I changed the title lock at the county recorder. I learned new words. Power feels like paperwork, ladies. Heads nodded. Some laughed softly at the truth of it. I felt the shell press into my thigh as if agreeing. Diana handed out a 1-page sheet. Bold letters at the top read, "Tools that help. Freeze credit. Set fraud alerts. Revoke authorized users. Call the bank and set a verbal password. Record property with free fraud monitoring. Pull an annual report. Keep copies of everything. Write a script for saying no." Another line read, "You do not need to apologize for protecting yourself." I traced the words with my finger. The sentence felt like a door I could walk through. A woman named Sheila spoke next. 61. My son used my social security number to open a store card. Bought a big screen and sneakers and a gaming chair. I confronted him. He said he thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. I filed a police report because my therapist said I could love him and hold him accountable. He called me a traitor. I slept. First time in months, a few seats over, a man named Carl rubbed his jaw. 65. My niece moved in to help, and then never left. She brought a boyfriend. Suddenly, my food disappeared and my tools walked away. When I asked for rent, they said family doesn't charge. I changed the locks while they were at brunch and left their bags on the porch. My sister won't speak to me. I'm eating well again. Laughter rolled around the circle, the kind that mends. Marjorie glanced at me, polite, letting me choose. I surprised myself by raising my hand. Diana nodded. "My name is Grace," I said. 67. Widow. I live by the ocean in the house my husband and I built when the kids were small. Last week, my son-in-law brought 3 lawyers to dinner and told me to sign a power of attorney, or I would never meet my granddaughter. My daughter sat beside him and said nothing. I didn't sign. My son and my lawyer showed up with documents I had already filed. An irrevocable trust. The house is protected now. My voice stayed steady until I said granddaughter. Then it thinned. I have not met her yet. She is still months away and already used as leverage. My daughter cried when she saw the trust, and I loved her and was angry with her at the same time. Today, I drank coffee on the porch and told myself life has its own way of teaching lessons. Tonight, I am here because I don't want my strength to turn into isolation. Silence met me first. Then Maxine spoke, her nurse voice warm and practical. "Grace, if I had been your daughter, I would have been proud to inherit a mother who knew how to protect a thing built with love." Eddie added, "Men like that count on noise. You gave him quiet and the law." "That's a lesson," with a long echo. Rosa leaned in. "Be ready for the bargaining stage. They come back with flowers and soup and sentences that begin with, 'If you really loved me, you would.' Write your script now so grief doesn't write it for you." I nodded, tears pressing without spilling. This was not pity. This was a classroom where everyone taught and everyone learned. Diana gave the floor to a volunteer attorney, a woman in her 50s with silver hoop earrings. She walked us through simple language, what a durable power of attorney is, how to pick a trustworthy agent, what undue influence looks like, how to document conversations, how to say I need time to review this with counsel and repeat it until the pressure fades. She did not talk down to us. She talked like we were the grown adults we had always been. Someone asked about grandparents' rights. The attorney sighed softly. It varies by state and by judge. It is not the leverage people think it is. Document your willingness to have a relationship that is separate from money. Write letters, save copies, judges like paper. But also remember this: you do not need a judge's permission to have self-respect. The room breathed together. I felt something loosen behind my ribs, a knot that had refused to give all week. During the break, Marjorie introduced me to a woman named Lila, who ran a small table with pamphlets. She pushed one toward me. "Dealing with financial exploitation by family members. Steps you can take." Another brochure caught my eye. "Supporting yourself after setting boundaries. Sleep. Food. Gentle routine." It made me laugh, not a bitter sound. A surprised one. Healing had a checklist. Of course it did. I had lived my life by checklists. When the circle resumed, Diana asked for one word from each person to carry into the week. Around the room came sturdy verbs. Breathe. Pause. Record. Delete. Eat. Call. Pray. Walk. When it was my turn, I said, "Protect." Not with a shout, with the quiet of a promise. Before we left, Diana asked if anyone wanted to share a small victory. Carl raised his hand. I ate breakfast at my table without counting the forks. Laughter and applause. Maxine added, "I called the bank and put my daughter's name back on my phone as daughter, not maybe fraud." I'm choosing hope and a strong password. More laughter. Then a hush that felt like blessing. As the chairs scraped and people folded handouts, Rosa slipped something into my palm. A small, smooth stone with a word burned into it. Boundaries. "Carry this until you don't need to," she said. "Then pass it on." I closed my fingers around the stone. It sat warm against the shell in my pocket. 2 small anchors, one from the past, one for the present. Outside, the air was softer. Marjorie hooked her arm through mine as we walked to the car. "Well?" she asked. "I'm not alone," I said. The sentence tasted like water after a long, dry walk. At home, I placed the stone beside the shell on the kitchen sill. The two looked right together, a memory and a boundary, side by side. I turned off the light and stood for a moment in the doorway, listening to the house breathe. The ocean kept its steady conversation with the shore. Somewhere in town, a ledger tallied debits and credits I did not control. Here, in this room, I counted what I could. A circle of chairs. 12 strangers who were not strangers anymore. A sentence I could carry into morning. I am not alone. And because I am not alone, I can keep the line. The call came just after dawn. I was still in my robe, the kettle beginning to rattle on the stove, when my phone buzzed against the counter. The screen lit with David's name. My heart stumbled because calls at that hour almost never carry casual news. I answered with my breath already tight. "Mom," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Emma had the baby last night. A girl. 7 pounds. Healthy." For a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes went to the window, where the sea was already throwing light against the glass. "A girl," I whispered. "They named her Eleanor Grace," David added, the second name deliberate, heavy. I leaned against the counter, hand gripping the edge. My name, wrapped around a child I had not yet seen, a child already used as a bridge or a weapon, I could not tell which. The kettle shrieked, startling me. I turned it off, poured the boiling water, and watched it steam without drinking. "She's fine," David went on. "Emma texted me to tell you. She wants you to visit. Said visiting hours are flexible." I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the shell on the sill. Eleanor Grace. The sound of it carried both ache and pride. Part of me wanted to run to that hospital, to hold the tiny bundle, to breathe in the smell of new life and let it wash away every sharp edge. But another part of me remembered Daniel's smile at La Riviera, the cold words, "Either sign it or you'll never see your granddaughter." I had not signed. Now here she was, carrying my name like a key, dangled in front of me as if to unlock the vault of forgiveness. "Do you think this is a peace offering?" I asked David quietly, "or another move in the game?" He was silent for a long moment. "Both," he admitted. "Emma knows your heart. She knows you'll want to meet the baby, and she knows how to use that want. Be careful, Mom." After we hung up, I sat for a long time, tracing the shell's ridges. My granddaughter had been born. She carried my name. And already she carried the weight of leverage she could not understand. I made tea and carried it to the porch. The air smelled of salt and promise. Children on their way to school passed the gate, laughing, their backpacks bouncing. I imagined Eleanor years from now, skipping down a path with her own bag, running into waves with bare feet, collecting shells. I ached for it, but my chest tightened with another truth. Love without boundaries had already poisoned too much between us. If I ran to the hospital without conditions, I would step right back into the same trap. Daniel would smile. Emma would soften just enough. And soon, the questions would circle back to the trust, to the house, to the ledger of what I owed. All morning I wrestled. My hands folded laundry, but my mind looped through arguments. A grandmother should be present, I told myself. A grandmother should not be bribed with her own bloodline, I countered. I remembered the circle of folding chairs at the community group. Rosa warning me. They'll come back with flowers and soup and sentences that begin with, "If you really loved me, you would." Now it was not flowers. It was a baby. My granddaughter. By afternoon, I could not stand the walls. I walked the beach, the sand damp underfoot, the gulls screeching their crude wisdom. Every wave seemed to ask, "Will you surrender or will you stand?" I bent and picked up a broken shell, sharp on one edge, smooth on the other. Love and pain in one palm. I carried it back with me. In the evening, Marjorie knocked with soup. She listened while I spilled the news, her eyes kind but unsparing. "They gave her your name," she repeated. "Yes." "That's no accident." "No," I said. "It isn't." She sat across from me at the table, spooning soup into bowls. "So here's the question. Do you go to that hospital on their terms or on yours? because the baby isn't the one who turned love into ransom. But if you cave now, they'll know the lock they can use every time." Her words stung because they were true. I stared into the soup, steam fogging my glasses. What if she grows up thinking I abandoned her? Marjorie leaned forward, voice steady. "Then you keep a record. Letters, journals, photos. You show her one day that you loved her fiercely, but you would not let greed dictate that love. Children grow. Truth grows with them. She'll know that night I wrote a letter. "Dear Eleanor Grace," I began. "The day you were born, the sea was restless and the gulls were loud. I have not yet held you, but you carry my name, and with it, you carry my hope. I want you to grow in love that is steady, not conditional. Love that does not demand signatures or deeds. One day, when you are old enough, I hope you will understand that my boundaries were for you too." I folded the letter and placed it in a box with the shells Emma and David had gathered as children. A new castle, waiting. As I turned out the lights, I whispered into the dark, "I love you, Eleanor. But love cannot be ransom." The words were both anchor and ache. And in that ache, I understood. Healing was not a single act, but a practice. Tonight, it was the practice of saying no, even to my own longing. I waited until the house was still. The clock ticked with the slow patience of someone who has seen too much. I cleared the table, set down fresh paper, and uncapped my fountain pen, the one Harold gave me on our 30th anniversary. The nib scratched across the page, steady, deliberate. If boundaries are love, then tonight I would put mine into words. I began slowly, as though each word needed to breathe. "Dear Emma, your daughter was born this week. My granddaughter, Eleanor Grace. Even writing her name feels like a prayer. I imagine her tiny hands curling, her first cry cutting the hospital air, her eyes opening to a world she does not yet know. I want you to know that I celebrate her with every beat of my heart, but I cannot celebrate under the shadow of ransom." I paused. The word ransom seemed harsh, but it was true. I let the ink dry, then continued. "Emma, I will meet Eleanor with joy, but not as a hostage. I will not barter love for deeds, signatures, or silence. A child is not collateral. My arms are open to her, and my heart is open to you. But those arms will not be twisted by threats, and that heart will not be purchased by demands." I set the pen down. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The house held its breath. This was the pivot, where love turned from ache to declaration, where grief slowed so clarity could arrive. I wrote more carefully now, each line like a stone placed in a path. You once placed a seashell in my hand and called it a castle. I kept it all these years, but last month, that castle became the coin of a bargain I never agreed to. And still, I choose to see it as a reminder. A castle must have walls. Without them, it is just sand. My boundaries are not a wall against you. They are the walls that keep us both safe. I felt the tears sting, but I did not stop. The door to me remains open, but it is open for you, Emma, for my daughter. Not for money, not for Daniel's schemes, not for leverage over a baby's cradle. When you are ready to place family above property, when you are ready to speak as yourself instead of through someone else's hunger, you may walk through that door. I will be here. I signed my name simply. Love, Mom. I read it aloud, my own voice steady in the quiet kitchen, a voiceover meant as much for me as for her. Speaking the words slowed time, softened the ache, and turned the letter from paper into promise. I folded the pages, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it with my thumb. On the front, I wrote her name, Emma Whitmore, in letters that trembled only once. The letter sat there under the lamp, glowing like a small beacon. I did not know if she would read it today, tomorrow, or never. But I knew this. I had named the truth without cruelty. I had carved a space for love that was not dependent on surrender. I whispered into the room, "Boundaries are love." And for the first time in weeks, the words sounded less like defense and more like hope. The chairs were already in a ring when I arrived at the community center. I wore my burgundy silk scarf because it feels like armor that does not rattle. In my bag, I carried the little shell Emma gave me when she was 8. I had set it in a saucer from my kitchen so it would not get lost among paper cups and napkins. Marjorie waved me over, her smile quick and steady. Diana poured coffee. The urn hissed. Rain ticked against the windows in a soft percussion that made everyone lean closer. We settled. Maxine adjusted her cane. Eddie rubbed a thumb over a crease in his denim sleeve. Rosa placed a small dish of peppermints in the center like a tiny altar. I took the shell from my bag and set it beside the candy. The shell caught the fluorescent light and threw back a clean white gleam. Someone asked what it was. I said, "A castle once." The room understood. Diana opened with our simple rules and invited reflections. People spoke. Carl reported that his table had stayed his. No one counted the forks. Sheila shared that she had slept a full night after setting a password with the bank. The attorney with the silver hoops reminded us to write down the dates of hard conversations and to drink water after hard calls. No one tried to fix anyone else. We did not need rescue. We needed witnesses. When it was my turn, I stood, because my knees behave better when I either sit or stand. The scarf fell into place across my shoulders. I told them about the birth, of my granddaughter, about the letter I wrote, about the door I kept open for Emma, and the lock I kept on my dignity. I did not mention Daniel's name. I said only that consequences had begun to arrive in rooms with gray carpet and bad coffee, and that I wished no one harm while I welcomed honesty. I reached for the shell and held it on my palm. I said a castle needs walls, or it becomes sand. I told them I had mistaken surrender for love before, and that the correction felt like a forgiven debt. I heard my own voice settle. The circle settled with it. We were old enough to know that quiet is not the same as absence, and silence is not consent when it holds a line. Marjorie asked if I wanted to place a word on the table for the week. I said yes. Then I said the sentence that has carried me from the restaurant to this room, from anger to clarity, from fear to rest. Boundaries are love. The words were simple, and they did not waver. They landed and stayed. No one applauded. They did not need to. Diana nodded and poured more coffee. We passed the peppermints. The attorney wrote a short list for a new member who asked where to begin. In the doorway, I saw a younger woman pause and hover. I smiled at her until she found a chair. I remembered the first Tuesday when I wanted to bolt. I stayed because Marjorie sat beside me and breathed at a human pace. We closed with small victories, as we always do. Mine was plain. I had set the shell on a public table, and it did not break. That felt like enough for one night. When we rose, chairs scraped the floor in a kind of soft parade. Marjorie linked her arm through mine, and we walked to the parking lot under a sky rinsed clean. The asphalt shone. A gull called. Someone laughed near the vending machines that still refused to take $1. Back home, I placed the shell on the kitchen sill and laid the burgundy scarf across Harold's chair. I brewed a cup of tea I did not need, the way sailors tie an extra knot after docking. The house listened. The sea went on with its faithful argument with the shore. Somewhere, reports were being filed and ledgers checked. I did not stalk the outcome. Justice had entered the story by its own door, and I let it work without my supervision. I stood in the threshold between the kitchen and the hall, a place I have stood 1,000 times. I looked at the photographs and felt both ache and relief. I said the sentence one last time, as much for the walls as for my bones. Boundaries are love. The house held the words and did not echo them back. It did not need to. They were built in now, like joists under a floor you trust with your weight. Before we say goodbye, we would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night, where stories like this keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude and respect. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember that sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story. If this story mirrors a chapter of your own life, share what boundary taught you the most. Share. And if you know a friend who needs this reminder, send it along. Kindness travels farther when it is carried together. We tell these stories so no one has to sit alone at a table for ambush, and so each home can remember its worth. The house still stands, and so do I. I cannot be moved,